Hi, here's another installment from Dr. Mackenzie, and I'd like to this time address the task analysis. Throughout the time, I realized that I haven't really done a formal session on task analysis, and a lot of us have had questions on it, but it's very interesting to take a bigger dive into it. So, let me actually go into what it takes to do a task analysis. And of course, the icons don't truly represent what I mean here, but the steps are really important. So, step number one, look at the comprehensive list of tasks that you are looking into adding into the training or the learning solution. The second thing you're going to do once you have that comprehensive list, so you do have to do a little bit of research, is you're going to then analyze which tasks need to be used or need to be focused on for the learning solution. For example, if you have 25 tasks total, you may not need to include all 25 tasks into your learning solution. You may need to focus on 2. You may need to focus on 5. And yes, sometimes you may need to focus on all 25. It really depends, and that's why the needs analysis of your learning solution project is so important. Once you have identified those tasks, whether it's 2 or 10 from the entire list, then you're going to figure out which of those tasks need a learning objective. Once you have identified those, you can write your learning objective. And once you have the learning objective, you can do 2 more things. You can figure out how you are going to evaluate it, and then you can write the content that is going to train on those tasks or is going to inform your participants on those tasks. So, moving along, there is a passion of mine around flying. Of course, simulation flying. I don't fly real planes, but this is plenty and it's not expensive at all. There's an application out there called Explain 11, and you probably have heard of it, maybe, or if you do a Google, you'll find it. And that's what I have been using for the last 7 years. And throughout the time, I have learned not authorized, but a basic procedure to begin or to start the Boeing 737 plane. And that's probably my favorite plane, obviously, because I know it a little bit better, and I can literally start the engines from cold and dark. And that's language they use in the aviation environment. So when you're looking on the screen, so let me take you through the task analysis. For example, if I were to do a learning solution on the overhead panel of the 737 Boeing jet. What you see on the left is the picture of the cockpit of the Boeing 737. And then encircled, I have the overhead panel, which expands to the right of the screen. The overhead panel does have quite a few sections. You don't necessarily see them. You see a lot of knobs and buttons and flip switches, etc., and gauges, but you don't necessarily know the sequence in which we have to start. As a matter of fact, when you're seated in a Boeing 767 cockpit, you don't really know whether you need to start on the front of the plane, when you see in front of the pilot, or if you need to start on the stack, which is the column on the right, in the middle of the pilot and co-pilot, or if you need to start above on the overhead, which is what we have here. So that is the very first thing you need to find out in your task analysis. Again, this is just an example of how you would start up a jet in a simulator. So we look at the entire list of tasks. So I'm going to compartmentalize this. Let's say that from a cold and dark state, we need to begin on the overhead panel. So that is phase 1 of the training. So if you were designing your training in phases, this could be phase number 1, because you cannot do anything else before you start on the overhead panel. And of course, the next question is, how do I make sense of all of this? What you're looking on the screen is just kind of complicated. So we need to take a bigger dive. That's where you begin talking with the subject matter experts, whether it's plane technicians or pilots or instructors, etc., right? And then of course you have to have a visual picture of what all of these means. Again, the person designing training is not necessarily going to be a pilot. Usually is a pilot is the one that does the training for a pilot. But in this case, we are still designing training for somebody else to facilitate it. So we are not necessarily going to facilitate. We're not going to necessarily know all the answers. That's why we need to do a task analysis. So the first question is, what is the sequence of all these knobs and buttons? And of course, even before that, probably the very first question is, do we know all the sections? So you have to probably start there. So in this particular example, what you can see is, and this picture I just lifted it from the internet to do a quick development of this module, and you can see how this picture does have color coded every single one of the sections. For example, number 1 that you see there in green is outlining the electrical system, and that's all outlined in green. Then if you go down to number 2, that's a yellow outline, that's the APU, or auxiliary power unit, which is what most planes have before the main engines begin running. And then if you go to number 3, that's the hydraulic system. You need hydraulics to move the ailerons, you need to retract the landing gears, you need the hydraulics for opening the doors, certain doors, certain planes, etc. Number 4, the IRS, which is essentially the compass of the plane. That's what tells the plane where you are, coordinates wise. And it's 2 of them in the 737. Actually, in the 747, you actually get 4 IRSs. And other planes have 3, and depending on the plane that you have, etc. And then number 5, just for this example, you have the AC, or the air conditioning, and the pressurization of the cabin. And it's a huge stack. If you see, it's all the orange. Now there are other systems. There's the flight controls, which I didn't align. There's the jump seat radio panel up on the upper right corner. There's the cockpit window and probe heating. There's the instrument display. There's the fuel pumps. And then below on the center, you have the lights. Right in the center is the engine start buttons. And then to the right, you have more lights. So we're not talking about all of it, but basically what I'm walking you through is, once you have decided what sections you are going to evaluate for tasks, then you can begin sequencing. Now remember, right now you're still doing a task analysis. You're not deciding that everything that we're talking about needs to be a part of the learning solution. So the next question is, identify from all those sections what is the order in which we need to execute them. What is the order in which a captain or a co-pilot needs to, the first officer needs to execute the sequence of startup? Well, for the purpose of our example, I already did the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And of course, I left the others out. This is assuming that numbers 1 through 5 are usually the ones where co-pilots or first officers tend to have a misalignment. They forget what sequence exactly needs to go first. And so, and again, it's hypothetical. So the next step is to then go deeper and ask, okay, so we have the sequence, that's what the numbers are for on the screen. But then what do we do? And what do we need to look for? Right? So I'll walk you through a couple of them just for the purpose of the example, and then I'll end up with another picture of this and with the first with the first learning objective. So what we are identifying right now is all the tasks. Now we've narrowed it down. So the first was all the tasks are everything that needs to happen in the overhead panel. That's all the little sections. The second step was, now we need to prioritize what are important to occur in the specific order. For example, you cannot do flight controls if your electrical system hasn't even gotten initialized. Okay, so that's why the prioritization is important. Once we have prioritized, which is what the numbers represent in this example, then you need to move to asking the question, of these 5 priorities, where do they fail? And what I'm telling you is, after asking, interviewing, observing pilots, the fail is not necessarily on turning on or off, but it's actually the sequence in which they turn them on. So that's what my training or my learning solution is going to focus on. The sequence of buttons or the sequence of sections that I will need to execute in order to begin a plane or to start a plane from a cold and dark state. So now that I have that, in my task analysis, I have identified one of the problems is sequence, the sequence of steps. Now, if you continue doing your task analysis, you can realize that the second task that is always a problem is, in this case, how to begin the APU or the auxiliary power unit. So that's probably going to be your second learning objective, because you have to flip a switch, but then you have to wait for a reading on a gauge. And after you have done that, you have to do a couple of other steps that sometimes, hypothetically speaking, the first officer forgets to do or don't know exactly which one goes first. So that could be the second learning objective of the entire task analysis. So now that I have that, and I'm going to get into the learning objectives here in a second, but I want to finalize by saying in the task analysis, what is important is you have to look at the entire sequence of tasks that your job is requiring to happen in order for the job to be complete. So in this case, of course, it's too elevated. It's to start a plane, a jet engine. But think about how do we doing a task analysis of a cash register operator at a retail department store, or doing a task analysis for an X-ray technician in a private practice, or the task analysis of a front office associate at a provider, at a doctor's office, etc. So the task analysis can be on anything. I'm just giving you an example of a plane just because it's a passion of mine and it's easy for me to talk about it. May not be resonating with some of you, but if that's the case, just leave me a note and I can go ahead and, of course, answer any comments. So to finish this example, what I did just now and with this picture is I talked about all the tasks. I talked about the problem that I identified, right? If I was observing or if I was interviewing pilots and first officers. And so I came to find out that the very first thing I need to address of my entire task list is the sequence of the first 5 tasks that are needed. So now that I have them on the screen, that's where the green boxes are. Then I will move to writing my very first learning objective. Remember, the first problem was sequencing. The second problem is, hypothetical, we said how to start the auxiliary power unit or APU. So we're not going to do that in this example, but what we will do is write the learning objective that goes with the first set of tasks that we identified are necessary in the learning solution we're going to build. And as you can see on the screen, the objective reads, the participant, using a picture of the overhead panel of a Boeing 737, will list the first 3 steps according to the startup checklist to start the plane from a cold and dark state. So let's talk a little bit about the color coding here. And this is a little bit beyond the task analysis, but I wanted you to have a full picture of what we're talking about. So the very first thing is the participant in red is the person that we're expecting to perform the action. Then, in what context? Well, using a picture of the overhead panel, we could conversely say in a simulator cabin, they will look at the overhead panel. But in this case, make it easy, just put a picture. We don't need, it's expensive, so that's in dark blue. And then in green, we have 2 different greens, but they are the same thing. Basically, we're talking about what the action is. The action is list the first 3 steps to start the plane from cold and dark. So that's the action that we want to evaluate. And then in purple is with what accuracy we want them to do it. And we want to do it according to the startup checklist. So that basically has to be apples to apples. If the checklist says you have to do these three things first, that's exactly what we expect them to show us or to tell us. They're going to list the 3 steps. And of course, in this particular picture, I no longer have the numbers because I just wanted you to extrapolate what we did in the task analysis and what the result is. Why we need to do the task analysis is because once we've done that, we know what steps or what tasks are needed, and then what we truly need to train. We don't need to train everything, but we need to train on some things. We need to design training, or we need to design a learning solution for something specific, some specific tasks. And the result of that is a learning objective, which is what you're seeing on the screen. So I hope that the task analysis video today has given you a better idea what the task analysis is. How do you present it? Well, you can watch my other video that I have posted, but quickly, the analysis of a task essentially is in paragraph format. You begin just like I was describing to you, what conditions, what I did I observe, did I ask, did I interview, etc. And then you move on to creating an outline. An outline or bullet points are perfect to say first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And then you finish with another paragraph saying of the entire task list that you saw before, we are focusing on tasks 1, 5, 7, 12, 15, or the entire list. And then your next section of a design plan will contain your learning objectives, and then you can move on to developing the materials, doing an assessment section, etc. So I hope this helped, and I'm sorry, it's my passion of planes, and that's what easily comes to me. But of course, if you have any questions, let me know, and I can definitely talk about a different topic with you. Thank you very much.